When I was 16, back in the mid-90s, the glorious time when teenagers like me believed we were invincible, knew everything, and thought the world couldn't touch us, I got into a ridiculous fight. It happened while I was hanging out with a group of friends at an acquaintance's house. I honestly can't remember what the fight was about, and that probably tells you just how stupid it was. Maybe it was a disagreement over music, or someone said something rude, or it could have been a clash of personalities. Whatever it was, my teenage brain decided I'd had enough. So I thought, forget this, I'm going home. The thing is, I lived about 5 miles away, and it was already 2 a.m. It wasn't like I had a car waiting outside, and with it being the middle of the night, buses weren't running. My only option was to walk. Not exactly the smartest choice, considering the neighborhood wasn't as safe as it seemed at first glance. On the surface, it looked like a regular suburban area, but anyone who lived there knew it could get pretty sketchy after dark. Still, I was in that rebellious, headstrong phase of being 16, so I thought, I've got this. No big deal. In hindsight, I think my friends were too caught off guard by the sudden argument to process what I was doing. Or maybe they didn't believe I'd really walk home in the middle of the night. I don't remember anyone trying to stop me though. I grabbed my things, stormed out of the houses, and started walking. The first mile wasn't too bad. It was still within the safety of the suburban neighborhood, with houses on either side of the street and occasional porch lights flickering on. I could hear the faint sounds of dogs barking in the distance and the hum of insects in the night air. But as I kept walking, the neighborhood started to change. The cozy homes with their well-kept lawns and flower beds slowly gave way to more industrial-looking streets. The houses were fewer and farther apart, and I found myself walking alongside a main road with highway access. That's when I noticed something was off. A grayish minivan drove past me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a car, right? But then, a few minutes later, I saw the van again. This time, it didn't just pass me. It turned the corner and disappeared for a bit, only to show up again a few blocks down. The pattern repeated. The van would pass me, disappear for a while, then come back again. I tried to shake it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I mean, who would be following a 16-year-old girl in the middle of the night, right? But the more it happened, the more obvious it became. This van was definitely following me. My heart started to race. I didn't want to panic, but I knew I had to do something. So I crossed to the other side of the street, walking against traffic so that no car could sneak up behind me. If the van was going to follow me, at least I'd see it coming. But the van kept up its creepy pattern. It would cross to the other side too, keeping its distance, but always reappearing after a few blocks. I considered turning back, but that felt pointless. I was already more than halfway home, and going back didn't feel like a safe option either. My mind raced through all the self-defense tips I'd heard. Don't run, I told myself. Stay calm. Walk confidently. I kept my pace steady and my eyes forward, but the fear was building. What if the driver got out of the van? What if I couldn't outrun them? About 2 miles into the walk, I spotted a 24-hour Fred Meyer store up ahead. Its bright lights felt like a beacon of hope in the darkness. The parking lot was empty, but at least the store was open. I thought if I could just make it inside, I'd be safe. I crossed the parking lot quickly, heading straight for the entrance. Just before I reached the doors, I heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle pulling into the lot. My heart dropped. I turned, and sure enough, it was the gray minivan. It had followed me all the way to the store. The van stopped, and the driver's side window rolled down. For a moment, I froze. Was this it? Was I about to be kidnapped or worse? Then, the driver called out to me, but not in the way I expected. "Hey," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I don't want you to come any closer. Just listen for a second." I stayed where I was, my body tense, ready to run if I needed to. "I noticed a dark car following you a few blocks back," he continued. "Every time you turned around or stopped, it would follow you down a side street, like it was trying to stay out of sight. I didn't like the look of it, so I started following you both to make sure you were okay." I was stunned. A dark car? I hadn't seen anything. I thought the minivan was the one stalking me, but now I wasn't so sure. "I haven't seen the car since you crossed the parking lot," the man said. "Please, go inside the store and call someone to pick you up. Don't keep walking alone." He waited until I was safely inside the store before pulling away. I stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Had I really been followed by someone else? And if this guy hadn't intervened, what would have happened? The store was mostly empty, except for a night cashier who looked about as tired as I felt. I walked up to her and explained what had just happened, my voice shaky. She was kind enough to let me stay with her while I figured out what to do. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone to call. My parents didn't have cell phones, and I wasn't about to wake them up with a call from the store phone. So I sat there, talking to the cashier, trying to calm my nerves. I stayed in the store for about an hour and a half, long enough for the adrenaline to wear off and for me to feel like the danger had passed. Eventually, I decided to finish the walk home. It was still dark, but the streets felt a little safer after my encounter at the store. I never did see the dark car the man had mentioned. Maybe he had been mistaken, or maybe the car had driven off after realizing someone was watching. But to this day, I'm convinced that the man in the minivan saved my life that night. If he hadn't been there, I don't know what could have happened. I've often wondered who he was. Was he just a concerned stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time? Or was there something more to it? Either way, I've never forgotten that night. It's one of those experiences that stays with you forever. A reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, there are people out there who are looking out for you, even if they're complete strangers. When I found the phone, it was lying at the edge of my bed, half hidden beneath a pillow. I don't even remember losing it in the first place, but the moment I turned it on, I regretted it. The screen was so bright that it felt like staring directly at the sun. Squinting, I had to turn it away from my face, casting its light around the dark room. The sudden brightness was almost blinding, but in that moment, something caught my eye, something terrifying. The phone's light illuminated the room enough for me to see a tall, skinny woman. She must have been in her late 50s, with long, white hair flowing past her shoulders. Her figure was gaunt, almost skeletal, and she was leaning over the bed, staring intently at Casey, my younger sibling. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She wasn't supposed to be there, no one was. My first instinct was to scream, and scream I did. The woman didn't wait around. The moment my voice broke the silence, she darted toward the door, moving faster than I thought possible for someone her age. She disappeared into the hallway, but I wasn't safe yet. You see, my house has a bit of a strange layout. My mom's bedroom is right next to the stairs, but to get there, you have to pass through my brother's room first. My scream must have woken him up because within seconds, my brother came rushing out, his eyes wide with alarm. He didn't hesitate. He immediately saw the woman fleeing from my room. My mom, hearing the commotion, opened her door just in time to see the stranger running past. And then there was my dog. He's not your typical guard dog. He's a yellow lab, friendly, goofy, and not the least bit aggressive under normal circumstances. But something about the situation flipped a switch in him. He bolted ahead of my mom and charged at the intruder, growling fiercely. Even though he wasn't bred for protection, that dog was ready to defend us with his life. He lunged at the woman and clamped his teeth around her ankle, pulling her to the ground. She yelped in pain, trying to shake him off, but my brother was right there. He threw himself on top of her, pinning her to the floor while my mom and I frantically called the police. The tension in the air was thick, the fear coursing through my veins. Casey woke up during the chaos, but I kept them in the room with me, trying to protect them from seeing what was happening outside. When the police finally arrived, they handcuffed the woman and took her away. We later found out that she had a serious case of dementia. She didn't know where she was or what she was doing, which made me feel a little bad for her. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the fear that had gripped me. I mean, how do you process something like that? A stranger in your house, watching you sleep, lurking right there in the dark? I was terrified, not just for myself, but for Casey too. A few days later, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. I decided to clean my room, hoping the normalcy of the task would help me forget. That's when I made another chilling discovery. As I moved the bed to clean underneath, I found food wrappers, chips, candy, and juice boxes. My stomach churned. The woman had been hiding under my bed, living there for who knows how long, sneaking food while we slept. The thought of her being that close, for that long, haunted me. It still does. This incident happened when I was about 19 or 20 years old, living in Savannah, Georgia. Back then, my life was far from ideal. I worked as a grunt laborer, going through temp labor agencies like Able Body or Labor Finders. I'd wake up at 4 o'clock, work until 5 o'clock, and barely make $60 for the day. Most nights, I'd drink myself to sleep, trying to escape the reality of my miserable existence. One morning, after a particularly rough week, I decided to skip work. It wasn't like they'd miss me. They could just find someone else to do the job. So instead, I called my girlfriend and told her I wanted to go to Tybee Beach. I'd already started drinking when she came over, but that didn't matter. We packed up some fishing rods, threw them in my beat-up van, and headed to the beach. On the way, we stopped at a little bar right across from the ocean. It was early, around 9 a.m. The place was empty. We sat at the bar, and I ordered a drink. That's when things started to get really strange. I had this weird feeling wash over me, like I was suddenly hyper-aware of everything around me. The door to the bar creaked open, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man walk in. He could have sat anywhere. There were plenty of empty seats, but instead, he chose to sit right between me and my girlfriend. His presence was unsettling from the moment he sat down. He began tapping his fingers on the reflective bar top, almost like they were legs, skating across the surface. It wasn't something most people would notice, but I did. It reminded me of something I used to do when I was bored in school, pretending my fingers were rollerblading across my desk. It was strange, but oddly familiar. Then he spoke. In a thick Nordic or Germanic accent, he said, "I see you're a man who notices details." Me too. His voice sent a chill down my spine. But that wasn't the only thing that freaked me out. I finally turned to look at him. His appearance was jarring. He had short, spiky hair with bleached tips, like something out of the late 90s, and he was dressed in expensive designer clothes. His jacket was Prada, his jeans were high-end, and even his boots looked pricey. But there was something off about him. His eyes were the most unsettling piercing gray, like a husky's, but his pupils were unnaturally small, like pinpoints. It made his gaze feel intense, almost predatory. And then there were his teeth, normal, but not. They looked sharper than they should have, like they'd been filed down slightly. His fingernails were long and pointed, as if he'd deliberately shaped them that way. He kept licking his teeth, almost as if he were savoring something. Despite his fancy clothes, he gave off the vibe of someone dangerous. I couldn't stop feeling like something was wrong. My instincts screamed at me that this guy wasn't human. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking about my girlfriend, complimenting her beauty in a strange, off-putting way. He made these bizarre remarks about how I should treat her better, which hit home because, admittedly, I wasn't always the nicest to her. But it wasn't what he said that rattled me, it was the way he said it, like he knew too much. I turned to my girlfriend and said, "You need to leave." She didn't argue or ask questions. She just got up and quietly walked out, heading to the coffee shop next door. That's when the man leaned in and said, "You were supposed to go fishing today. If you had, I would have drowned you in that ocean." And then he hissed at me. A strange calmness washed over me, almost like I knew this was something beyond normal. I asked him, "Who are you?" His response was in a language I couldn't understand, something guttural and harsh, almost like Hebrew or Arabic. Confused, I said, "Say it in a way I can understand." He grinned and replied, "You can call me Jimmy C. I jumped off the San Francisco Bridge years ago, and we've been watching you ever since." He never referred to himself as I. It was always we, like there was something else watching me too. Before I left, he pointed to a white Volkswagen Beetle outside the bar and said, "Next time you see me, I'll be driving a black Mercedes. The license plate will say Utopia." That night, I was strangely calm, almost zen-like. But my girlfriend? She started having nightmares about Jimmy C's face, appearing in her dreams. Over the weeks, the paranoia crept in. Every black car I saw, I checked for that Mercedes and its license plate. It was like an obsession I couldn't shake. Fast forward 10 years, I'm 29 now, and I still think about that day. I often wonder if any of it was real or just a drunken hallucination. But there's one thing that still haunts me. My ex-girlfriend kept a journal back then, and when I reached out to her recently, she still had it. She verified everything. That encounter was real. I remembered the whole thing, and it was even more vivid than I thought. She wrote it all down at the coffee shop, right after it happened. Reading what she wrote from that day reassured me I wasn't imagining the details. This was real. It's probably the most frustrating and terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. You might think it was just some crazy guy, but unless you felt it, saw it, and heard him talk about things only you knew, you can't grasp the full impact. Even 10 years later, I'm haunted by it. Thankfully, my ex-girlfriend was there too, so I wasn't alone in this nightmare. Reaching out to her after so long actually helped us reconnect after a decade. It turns out, it disturbed her as much as it did me. Even though I'm 10,000 miles away in Southeast Asia now, I can't stop thinking about Jimmy C's twisted face. I wonder if he still creeps behind me. The fear still lingers. Sometimes, I have to drink myself to sleep or find someone for the night, just to feel like I'm not alone. But is it just me? Or is he or they still watching? I was 15, just got home from work, and went to my room to change and get ready for bed. As I was in the middle of dressing, I glanced at my bedroom window. My heart stopped. I saw a man's face staring back at me. I dropped to the floor, turned off the lights, and scrambled to put my clothes on. My eyes never left the window. The face was gone, but then, out of nowhere, I saw a camera pointed at me. No face, just a camera. I bolted from my room, ran to tell my mom and brother. My brother went outside and found our ladder from the backyard lying there, but no one was around. I couldn't sleep for a year after that. I haven't thought about it in years, until now. When I was 11, I woke up in the middle of the night to a man standing over me. His hand was over my mouth and nose, and he told me not to scream and to roll over. I rolled onto the floor and tried to scream, but I was so scared, no sound came out at first. It took me a second to find my voice. My mom heard me and came rushing in, fighting the man off. He was over 6 feet tall, and she's only 5'3", but she fought and screamed so fiercely that he ran off, jumping out of the window he had climbed in through. They never caught him. This didn't happen to me, but to my sister. She and her husband had just had a baby, and she was home alone with the newborn. Around 2 a.m., she heard a loud knock at the back door. She went to check and saw a woman begging her to let her in, saying her husband had just beaten her and was looking for her. Of course, my sister hesitated. With a newborn in the house, she didn't want to take any chances. She told the woman she'd call the police, but the woman said, "No, don't call them, just let me in." That's when my sister got suspicious. She went to grab her phone and called 911. When she came back, the woman was gone. When the police arrived, they told her this was a common trick. Couples would stage these situations to get people to open their doors. Just thinking about how close that came to my sister and her baby still gives me chills. 2 years ago, me and 2 of my friends were driving home late at night after getting Mexican food. Suddenly, red and blue lights started flashing behind us. Amy, who was driving, didn't feel safe pulling over on the dark, empty road, so we slowed down but kept going. Then we noticed something strange. The car didn't look like a police car at all. It was old and beat up. Ashley, our other friend, realized it probably wasn't the police. The car sped up and passed us on the opposite lane, trying to cut us off. We called 911, and the dispatcher confirmed there were no police cars in our area. Suddenly, the car sped up again, trying to block us. That's when a real police car showed up. We pulled over, and the fake cop car sped away, chased by the real police. We never found out who they were or what they wanted, but it taught me a lesson: if you ever feel unsafe pulling over, trust your gut. Hey guys, Lazy here. Thanks so much for listening. Sorry this video's a little late. I just missed Halloween. But hey, they don't call me lazy for nothing, right? I hope you all had an awesome Halloween. If you have pictures of your costumes, send them to me on Twitter. I'd love to see what you guys dressed up as. Before I go, I've been hearing that a lot of you aren't getting notified when I upload videos, or worse, that YouTube has unsubscribed you without warning. So, make sure to hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. And while you're at it, smash that like button, or I'll have to come smash it for you. I'll be back with another video very soon. Until then, stay spooky and remember the best things happen in the dark.